All right, we're covering some statistics. What is statistics? The term statistics can have two meanings. Describe both meanings. Statistics is the science of collecting, organizing, and interpreting data, and statistics are the data that describe or summarize something. Each year, a group surveys 50,000 households to study internet usage. In one area of the study, the group is interested in finding how many hours a day the household spends streaming video from the internet. Describe the 5 basic steps in a statistical study with an example of the application below. Describe the first step in the statistical study. Choose the correct answer below. All right, so we want to state the goal of your study. In this case, it is to discover how many hours per day a household spends streaming internet video. So you need to find, what are you trying to do? What's the goal of the study? Describe the second step in this statistical study. Choose the correct answer below. Choose a sample from the population. In this case, it would be choosing a sample of 50,000 households. So pick a sample. Describe the third step in the statistical study. Choose the correct answer below. Collect raw data from the sample and summarize these data by finding sample statistics of interest. In this case, it would be asking the households how many hours they spend streaming internet video and turning this data into an average. So we find the goal, take a sample, do some stats on the sample. The fourth step would be use those statistics to say something about the population. In this case, based on the data gathered, the group estimates the average time per day that a household spends streaming internet video. And the final step is you draw conclusions to determine what you learned and whether you achieved your goal. Why is it so important that a statistical study use a representative sample? Briefly describe 4 common sampling methods. Why is it so important that a statistical study use a representative sample? If the sample fairly represents the population as a whole, then it is reasonable to make inferences from the sample to the population. So if the sample represents most of the population, then whatever we say about the sample is probably something we can say about everybody. Briefly describe 4 common sampling methods. Choose the correct answer below. Simple random sampling, systematic sampling, convenience sampling, and stratified sampling. What is bias? How can it affect a statistical study? Give examples of several forms of bias. What is bias and how can it affect a statistical study? Bias refers to any problem in the design or conduct of a statistical study that tends to favor certain results. Here are some examples of bias. An experiment that's not blinded. A researcher with a personal stake in the outcome distorts the true meaning of the data. And a sample that's not representative of the population is biased towards a different population. What is a placebo? Describe the placebo effect and how it can make experiments difficult to interpret. How can making an experiment single-blind or double-blind help? A placebo lacks the active ingredients of a treatment being tested in a study, but is identical in appearance to the treatment. Describe the placebo effect and how it can make experiments difficult to interpret. Choose the correct answer below. The placebo effect refers to a situation in which a patient improves simply because they believe they're receiving a useful treatment. It can sometimes be difficult or impossible to distinguish between effects that arise from the actual treatment and those that arise from psychological factors. So you give somebody something, you say this is going to make you feel better, even though it doesn't, you start to feel better. That's the placebo effect. How can making experiments single or double blind help? If an experiment is blinded, then any effect arising from psychological factors should affect all groups equally. Decide whether the statement below makes sense or is clearly true, or does not make sense or is clearly false. Explain. In my statistical study, I used a sample that was larger than the population. So the sample can't ever be larger than the population because you take the sample from the population. No, the statement does not make sense. A sample is a subset of the population and cannot be larger than the actual population. Decide whether the following statement makes sense or is clearly true, or does not make sense or is clearly false. Explain your reasoning. I want to test the effects of vitamin C on colds, so I gave the treatment group vitamin C, and I gave the control group vitamin D. That is bad. You want to give them vitamin C as well to see the impact of vitamin C on colds. So this should not be vitamin D, it should be vitamin C. The statement does not make sense. The control group should only receive a placebo, not another treatment. So this should be a placebo. The control group should receive nothing. In order to gauge public opinion about how to handle Iran's growing nuclear program, a research group surveyed 993 American women by telephone and asked them to rate the threat Iran's nuclear program poses to the world on a scale of 1 to 10. Describe the population, the sample, the population parameters, and the sample statistics. Identify the population in the given problem. Choose the correct answer below. The population is the group of women we're trying to get an opinion about. And this group all have something in common, and they were all American women. Identify the sample for the given problem. Choose the correct answer below. Identify the sample for the given problem. Choose the correct answer below. The sample would be the 993 women that you took from the population, American women. Identify the population parameter in the study. Choose the correct answer below. The population parameter is the average threat rating from 1 to 10, or 0 to 10. Identify the sample statistic. Choose the correct answer below. The mean threat of the sample of the 993 American women. A recent telephone poll of 999 randomly selected adults revealed that 6 in 10 adults believe that there's been progress in finding a cure for cancer in the last 29 years. Describe the population, the sample, the population parameter, and sample statistics. Identify the population of the given problem. So 999 randomly selected adults. So all adults in the country. Identify the sample for the given problem. The sample would be the 999 adults selected. Identify the population parameter in the given study. Choose the correct answer below. You want to do the percentage of adults in the country who believe that there has been progress. The sample statistic is going to be the 6 out of 10. That was true of the sample. In a test of the effectiveness of garlic for lowering cholesterol, 54 adults were treated with garlic in a processed tablet form. Cholesterol levels were measured before and after the treatment. The changes in their levels, LDL cholesterol, have an average mean of 3.4. Identify the sample, the population, the sample statistic, and the population parameter. This should be out of adults. Right? Identify the sample. The sample is the 54 adults. The population should be all adults. The sample statistic is that for this sample, the average mean was 3.4. So it should be the average change in is 3.4. The population parameter is just the average change in the levels of LDL cholesterol for all adults. So the population represents everybody, and the sample is just the people you took. In a survey of 208 human resource representatives, 44% said that the most common job mistake is to have little or no knowledge of the company where the applicant is being interviewed. What's the population? So it looks like it's all human source representatives. The sample is this 208 people that you picked. The population parameter, we wanted to know the percentage of people who said, the percentage of all humans who said this, right? So it's D, so it's just all because it's population. And the sample statistic is this 44% number, right? It's just data about the group that you've taken. A researcher wants to determine the percentage given below. Describe how the researcher should apply the 5 basic steps in a statistical study. Here's the first step. Identify the population and what you want to do. Then you want to gather data. From the largest sample of drivers that you can find. Then you want to find your sample statistic. Of interest is the percentage of drivers in the sample to have auto insurance. Then use the sample statistic to say something about the actual population. And then we should use some methods to determine the quality of the estimate to the actual population. You want to determine the average number of robocalls received each day by adults in New Zealand. Which sample is most likely to be a representative sample, representative of everybody? Let's see here. It should be sample 4. Why is sample 4 the most likely to be a sample representative sample? Let's see, a set of 506 New Zealanders with phone numbers randomly selected from a list of all phone numbers, and so these are randomly selected from all the phone numbers. That's going to be representative. The list is a random sample that is not likely to be biased. What's wrong with sample 1? A set of 506 New Zealanders randomly selected from a list of all licensed car owners. That's just a specific group of people. Sample 1 is biased because it includes only car owners and does not include those who cannot afford a car. Why is sample 2 not a representative? Sample 2 is that the first 506 people to visit a particular Auckland grocery store one day. Sample 2 is likely to be biased because it is limited to just a particular geographic area. What's wrong with sample 3? The 506 adults in New Zealand who respond to a survey, this sounds like convenience. Sample 3 is a convenience sample limited to readers of the newspaper and is therefore likely to be biased. Sample 4. A researcher wants to determine the typical dietary habits of students at college. See whether each of the following samples is likely to be representative and explain why not. So representative of the whole campus. A, students in a single fraternity. That looks bad. Students majoring in biology, sociology. Okay. Students who participate in student council. No. Students who are enrolled in a required biology class. So since this one's required, everyone has to take it. And so that might be representative. The only sample that might be representative would be sample 4, since all students are required to take the biology class. Identify the sampling method as a simple random sample, systematic sampling, convenient sampling, or stratified sampling. An IRS auditor randomly selects 40 taxpayers in each of the following categories. So stratified means single categories. Stratified. To determine her power usage, Miranda divides up her day into 3 parts, morning, afternoon, and evening. She then measures her power usage at 2 randomly selected times during each part of the day. That is also stratified. Identify the sampling method: a simple random sampling, systematic sampling, convenient sampling, or stratified sampling. A computer randomly selects 100 names from a list of all voters. Those selected are surveyed to predict who will win the election of the mayor. Just select 100 names. That's just simple random sampling. Determine whether the following study is an observational study or an experiment. So the difference is in an experiment, you actually do something, right? So you do something in an experiment. In an observational study, you're really just watching and recording. If the study is an experiment, identify the control and the treatment groups and discuss whether single and double blinding is necessary. If the study is observational, state whether it is a case control study, and if so, identify the cases and controls. A study at a university separated 107 volunteers into groups based on psychological tests designed to determine how often they lied and cheated. Those with a tendency to lie had different brain structure than those who did not lie. All right, so there was nothing here in which they actually did something, right? So they may have split people, but they didn't do anything to the groups. They didn't do anything to one group and not something to another group, right? So this is an observational study. It's case control. The cases of the volunteers that had a tendency to lie and the controls of the volunteers that did not lie. Determine whether the following study is an observational study or an experiment. If the study is an experiment, identify the control and treatment groups and discuss whether single or double blinding is necessary. If the study is observational, state whether it is a case control study, and if so, identify the cases and controls. In the study of the effects of magnets on back pain, some participants were treated with magnets, right, while others were given non-magnetic objects with a similar appearance. So this for sure is an experiment. The treatment group is patients that use the magnets. The control group is patients that receive the placebo, and neither one of them know whether they were given something real or not. So it's double blind. Determine whether the following study described is observational or an experiment. If the study is an experiment, identify the control and the treatment groups and discuss whether the single or double blinding is necessary. A study by University social scientists found that 17.9% of first-year women students surveyed at a regional college experienced sexual assault during that first year. So this just looks like they're observing that. It's definitely observational. So the study is not an experiment. Study is not an experiment. If the study is observational, state whether it's a retrospective case. So they're asking them about their experience. So it is not a retrospective study. If the study is not retrospective. And it was observational. Determine whether the following study is described as an observational or experiment. Using a survey of 1,565 people, survey usually means observational. Researchers determined that 89% of the people in the country believe that the country is more politically divided than in the past, and that those divisions will persist. The study is observational. The study is not an experiment. The study is not an experiment. It is not retrospective. And it is not retrospective. It's observational. What type of class statistical study is most likely to lead to an answer to the following question? If the study is an experiment, identify the control and treatment groups. Which of the two available treatments is more effective in protecting seeds from Mediterranean copper beetles? So this is definitely an experiment. You're going to apply some treatments. So you're going to need, you're comparing two, so you're going to need to compare this to one that's not being affected. The control group will be seeds without any treatment, and there will be two treatment groups. The study is an experiment. We don't care about blinding, right? We don't care. The crops don't care, right? The seeds don't care don't have feelings or know whether they're being given the treatment or not. Blinding is not necessary since seeds don't know whether or not they're given the treatment. If the study is observational, the study is not observational, it's an experiment. The study is not a retrospective study. It's an experiment. What type of statistical study is most likely to lead to an answer to the following question? Over a period of many years, which National Football League teams with cold weather home fields have better records? Here you're just observing. Right? The study is not an experiment. The study is not an experiment. It's an observational study. And here we're looking, it looks like we're looking over the past years. So that's a retrospective study. The study is retrospective, so you're looking at cold weather teams versus non-cold weather teams, right? So then the cases would be the teams with cold weather home fields, and the controls would be teams without cold weather home fields. Does taking a daily aspirin reduce the incidence of heart attacks? Here, we want to take something, so this is an experiment. The control group will be people who would not take daily aspirin, and the treatment group are people who would take it. This is an experiment. Here you would go ahead and here we're going to do Here, it doesn't matter whether the people who are participating know whether they're getting aspirin or not. So they can take aspirin with no problem. But they don't need to not know that they're taking aspirin here. The study is an experiment. If the case is a retrospective study, it is not a retrospective study. Experiment. The following summary of a statistical study gives a sample statistic and a margin of error. Find the confidence interval and answer any additional questions. So the confidence interval is you're going to go from one low number to a high number, and it's given by the margin of error. A poll was conducted the day before a state election for senator. There are only 2 candidates running for this office. The poll results show that 61% of the voters favor the Republican with a margin of error of 3 percentage points, which means you could be off by 58%, 3% that way, or 3% this way. So -3 or +3. So that would take us from 58 to 64. The lowest possible number here is 58, so they would still win the election because that's more than 50. So the Republican is likely to win because the lowest number is still more than 50%. Or in other words, both endpoints of the confidence interval are greater than 50%. A national survey of 1,520 respondents reached on landlines and cell phones found that the percentage of adults who favored legalized abortion had dropped from 52% a year ago to 45%. The study claimed that the error attributed to its sampling is plus or minus 4 percentage points. Would you claim that a majority of people oppose legalized abortion? So we're talking about plus or minus 4%, so it's 45%. And then this way 4%, this way 4%. Here it's 41% to 49%. So even at its best, it's still less than 50%. So the confidence interval is 41% to 49%. Would you claim that a majority of people oppose legalized abortion? Well, the highest number is 49%. So we would say no, because the confidence interval for those against is below 50%. These are the people, wait, let's just make sure we're reading this. Oh, these are people who favor it, so more people actually oppose it. The following summary of statistical study gives a sample statistic and a margin of error. In a survey of 1,001 people, 711 or 71% said that they voted in a particular presidential election. The margin of error for this survey was 4%. However, actual voting records show that only 61% of all eligible voters actually did vote. Does this imply that people lied when they responded in the survey? Well, if this is the actual truth, and this 71% could go from 67 to 75, and 61% is not in this interval, and this is the truth, then that means that some of these people flat out lied. So we're talking about 67 to 75 for these people. The confidence interval does not include 61%. If the survey was conducted properly, then it's unlikely that its results would be so different from the actual results. Go back here. Great. Consider an experiment designed to determine the effectiveness of a new drug. The drug is given to participants in the treatment group, while participants in the control group receive a placebo, which means really nothing. The randomized double-blinded study with 476 patients shows that 23% of those given the new drug had a decrease in symptoms, while 70% of those given the placebo experienced improvement. So the 70% of the people who were given nothing actually got better, which means that we probably don't know anything about this drug. Right. So with the drug, 23% had a decrease in symptoms, while 70% of those given experienced improvement. Those given the new drug were in the treatment group, so the new drug, and those who were given the placebo were in the control group. That's always true. The new drug does not appear to be effective because it's not even doing better than the thing that was actually nothing, because a higher percentage of those who took the placebo, the thing that was actually nothing, did the results appear to indicate that a placebo effect was present in the trials? A placebo effect might be present because many subjects that took the placebo experienced improvement. However, it's possible that these subjects could have improved without taking the placebo, so there is no information to be sure. If you were in a panel deciding whether to approve the new drug, how would you vote based on this study? The new drug should not be approved because it does not appear to be effective. A study done at the Center for Disease at a certain university tracked 18,630 asymptomatic patients with a certain disease who started therapy at different points in the progression of the infection. It was discovered that asymptomatic patients who postponed antiretroviral treatment under their disease was more advanced, faced a higher risk of dying than those who had initiated drug treatment earlier. Complete parts A through C below. Identify the population and the population parameters of interest. The population is all asymptomatic patients with the disease who've undergone treatment. The population parameters are the survival rates and the times in which the treatment began. B. Describe the sample and sample statistic for the study. It sees 18,630 asymptomatic patients with the disease. The sample statistic is the survival rates and the times. Let's see. Identify the type of study. Looks like you're just tracking these people. Right, so you're just looking at the data. You're not doing anything to them. You're not experimenting on them. Consider the statistical study below and then A. Identify the population and population parameter. 106 people with a certain occupation were given cognitive tests. It was discovered that those participants who were given a suggestion that their occupation might affect their performance on the test actually did worse on the test. right? So this is definitely an experiment. So the population parameter is the population of all people with this occupation. And the parameters are the test scores for the people, categorized by whether they were given the suggestion. The sample is this 106 people. The sample statistic is the test scores for the 106 people studied, categorized by whether they were given the suggestion. And this for sure is an experiment. Hope it helps.